hold on, before we get too far, I need to talk about some things and show you some details. Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 5 in the Fangled Fastback series. If you've been watching, you already know I started with a 68 coupe that was wrecked, hit front and rear. I dissected that car, salvaged the rocker panels and a few other parts, and I'm basically hand building a 68 Mustang Fastback from mostly dynacorn parts. So I have been putting parts roughly together and test fitting, as I always say, test fit everything before you ever do any welding. And I want to show you some details. Now in this particular car, I am starting with a convertible floor pan. This is a little different in that it has an extra rocker panel on the inside and extra bracing across the center and underneath. And the reason for that is it makes the car a lot stiffer. The convertibles did not have a roof structure, so they didn't have that kind of support to keep it from bending in the middle, so they tried to build it up from the bottom. So if you're trying to build a newer version of these cars, you can use the convertible floor pan because of all the extra bracing. Now this car is intended to be used for autocross, so that's where the extra stiffness comes into play, and the intent is to also add in a roll bar. More on that later. So let me show you where I'm at right now and a few things that have to happen before I can continue. Brief overview. I have the roof for the car. There is one of the side assemblies. Here are the quarter panels. Back there is the other side assembly. A variety of other pieces and parts in those boxes. Deck filler panel and brackets and different things. That is the rear seat door. Goes behind the back seat or in the back seat area. These two boxes had the front frame rails, and there's a trunk lid and front and rear valance, and the rocker panels here from the 68 coupe. So let me show you some other things. So as we come forward and I show you my boat trailer jig that I made specifically for Mustangs, I will show you this floor pan, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Now, as I had mentioned, on the convertibles, they have this box, and that's the inner rocker panel. This is then the center rocker panel, and then, of course, the outer rocker panels, which are over here, will be welded to the outside. Also, on the convertible, the seat pans are connected. So you have this hump in the center that connects the two over the tunnel and makes that stronger, and then underneath there is more bracing. You have these box pieces that are underneath the floor or the seat pans, and then this center section, there would be a plate that bolts to that and helps reinforce all of the midsection of the car and make it stronger. So that's why if you're trying to build something strong, you can use the convertible floor pan. Now let me show you what I'm doing with the front section here. As I had mentioned, these are the dynacorn one-piece shock towered elite frame rails. Pretty well built. They fit my jig right on the money. Everything's lining up. There's no gaps underneath. It's zeroed out right there. Also the same in the back where it's sitting in the channel. So I'm very happy with that. Now these firewalls, my understanding is they only make one version. Like, they make this version for either coupe, fastback, convertible, whatever, and it's up to you to make it fit. It doesn't make any sense for them to pre-cut one here whenever they can just send it to you like that. So in my previous video, I had made a template out of cardboard and mimicked the shape of this inner rocker and basically replicated that up here. So I ended up with a line, an angle, and a straight edge, and I cut that out, and then I bent a flange on those three planes that would overlap this area, and this area. Well, when I did that, I ran into a little bit of a problem because I did not consider the torque boxes. And let me move the firewall and show you why you need to look at that. So these torque boxes are dynacorn, and they fit fairly well. And what I was talking about with the flanges is you have to consider this flange on the inside of the torque box this flange on top here and this flange on the inside. So when the firewall is in place, you have to compensate for those as well. So you want to make sure it gets close into this area, so you just, you know, tighten it up, but you want to make sure you have room for those pieces. Now what I'm running into is, as I'm test fitting, which I always recommend, I have put this upper section of the torque box in place, and it looks like, from my perspective here, that it should be on a parallel with this inner, or this outer flange for the frame rail. Now if you remember on the Cobra Jet project, or the original style, the torque box would have sat on top here, and then the floor pan just went over it, and you ended up with a transitional hump in there. And I modified it on the Cobra Jet so that you would have a smooth transition. Well, in this case, they've already kind of made it that way. Like, there is no overlap here. Now what I may end up doing is welding that together, but for now there's nothing else I can do about that. You can even see this angle right here matches. But what I'm running into is I can't bring it, how do I want to put this? I can't bring it up like this. And the reason for that is right here. There is an interference with the floor support and this edge of the upper part of the torque box. So what that means is I can't bring this corner up, and I can't change that angle because of that. So, simple fix, I'm going to trim out part of that overlap there where it's hitting the inside of the floor support. Just little things like this make a big difference. You know, clean that up, and that'll let this come up. It'll change this plane and get everything squared away, or at least it should. So once I have that fitted, then I can focus more on getting the firewall in place. So I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to make sure I have the passenger side able to fit like it should, and then we'll get back to taking a look at this and give you some more details. So simply enough, I put a little mark where the excess metal was, pulled it out, and took the big cutoff wheel and just cut down that extra piece of metal. Took the sanding disc and smoothed it up, and then worked it back into position, and just a little bit of manipulation with the vice grips and different things, I was able to get it to sit in what I feel is the proper spot. So here it is in position. It looks like it is fitting like it should, at least in my opinion. I do have it clamped here as it was before, so all that is in place. And also I put this straight edge here that runs all the way across both the frame rails, and that's pretty darn close, I would say. So I'm happy with this. I will work on that side, get it squared away, and then I will end up taking all of this back out so that I can custom fit the firewall to make sure everything lines up. So I started test fitting on the passenger side with the upper plate, and I did some minor fine tuning. I had to trim it like I did before, cutting off that extra piece of metal. But then I started looking at it a little harder because the plane of the plate versus the plane of the frame rail was off. And so the more I looked at it, the more I realized that the outer portion of the frame rail, the angle seemed wrong. Like it was, the leg was long, and the way it mated was short, basically. So I took some time, took a hammer out, straightened out the flange, took some effort, and I rebent the flange to make it match the plane of the other frame rail. And so now when if I could take a straight edge across it, it's all equal and all even. So sometimes you have to do these things, and you know, it takes some effort. Okay, so I have the upper plate in place. I also have the lower piece in place, and you know, this frame rail here, whenever I was trying to make sure everything lined up, this leg was just too long. So modified that, got it back into the right plane. You can see it, maybe see it better there. So all that lines up straight across. Now also I marked off where I'm going to be needing to mimic the firewall. So like here is a line showing this section right here in particular that I'll need to fill that with some of the metal from the firewall. This overlap won't be a big concern, and this won't be a big concern so much. The forward plate or lower plate, it all fits really nice. I got it up against, or mostly up against. Right now it's just kind of sprung. I can push that up with my hand, but it goes up nice against the bottom of the frame rail. And I was noticing, because the inner torque box is right here, if you look inside of this opening, you can see, hopefully you can see, there's a flange on that inner torque box. So what I want to do is take advantage of that. So I will be adding some holes here to make sure I'm attached to that. And I'll look it over and make sure that if there's any other flanges. I think there is actually another flange in there. So I may try to connect all those together as well. And of course, you'll have this outer area here. I'll weld it to the inside of the frame rail and weld it to the bottom. That'll all come later. But for now, I just wanted to make sure that I could get the firewall lined up with all this stuff and have room for those little flanges. So here's what I did to make a template. I just put the piece of cardboard on top of here, and I marked where these lines ran out. So like this first angle and then the second angle, just eyeballed those across, cut that shape out of it, and then I can bring that up and set it on the firewall. So the challenge is making sure you get that in the right spot, because you could go up or down slightly, and I want to make sure I'm not taking too much metal off. So what I might do, because I've got to figure out this transition in the bottom, I may start with a lower, let's say a lower setting on this, and just trace this out so that I can don't take away too much metal, essentially. So if I did this, that gives me that shape, and now I can cut. Well, I don't want to cut that off. Let me back up just a step. I want to create a flange on the inside. So I'd come up inside of here. This, I don't know if I really want to worry about a flange too much, but I may put one here. And then I'm going to reconsider this flange, and I'll show you that in just a second. Let me move the firewall and show you why. So here's what I'm thinking. When I put this in, I've got this upper flange right here that basically mates to this top portion. So if I were to bring the firewall in, I don't benefit by overlapping that flange a second time. It really doesn't matter. And I probably, now that I look at it a little harder, it may not even matter to do the inner flange, because I have that inner lip So ultimately, I could just cut this off the way it is. I don't need to make those flanges like I initially thought. But this, what I can do, get this too far out of the way, I can trim this cardboard down some more to make it fit that corner. So let me just do that real quick. If I just cut that off, I know I'm not real good at the arts and crafts thing. Yeah, I need to trim this. See, that tightens everything up. That tightens everything up. I can even go a little bit more off this bottom, just because of the way it's shaped. So basically, what I'm getting at is take your time, make stuff like this cardboard template, and later on, even if I don't have this connected, I can fill that with seam sealer, because this whole thing is triangulated. It's not going anywhere, and it won't gain anything by having this welded to that anyway. So I could do a little more fine tuning and just kind of see what I can end up with. It's arts and crafts time, kids. But you know what? There's plenty of cardboard in case I don't cut it right. I've got all this extra boxes that I can use. So it's getting closer. You get the idea. There we go. So if I can trace that onto the firewall, and of course I will need to make sure my left and right measurement. So the distance between the rocker panels is like right on 49 inches. And the, let me angle up here so you can see, maybe see, the distance for the firewall from side to side is 53 1/4. So basically, you know, you do some math, you split that in half, 26 7/8 or something like that. And then you could back measure, you know what I mean. You can figure it out. I'm not going to go through all the math with you. But once you figure out that edge distance, how far you're off from this edge versus the frame rail, you know, if you were to position this side to side, then that'll dictate where your cardboard cutout goes. I hope that makes sense. Second time we've had snow. Not a fan. Not a fan. But I will say this insulation is helping, and as I said before, Mr. Cool was helping me out. It's about 52 degrees here in the shop right now, and I've had this running for maybe, I don't know, not quite an hour, maybe half an hour. So let's get some work done. Alright, so I want to show you what I'm doing. As I was measuring earlier, I want to point out the length of this, or the width of this, actually matches almost dead on with the inner flange here of this rocker panel. So you can do some math, you can obviously add, subtract, and figure out where center is and all those sort of things, and that's fine. As I showed you earlier, I can take this cardboard template and know roughly where I need to end up, and I can trace that again onto this section up here. However, I really need to know how far this is going to go underneath that. And without taking all of this apart again, which I will anyway, but I'm going to show you this, I made a template of the shape of the firewall. Now what I can do is take that and follow the angle here on the frame rail, slide it down, and I can draw a line that will at least show me where the firewall should end up underneath the floor pan. So by doing that, I can measure back that distance. So if I drew a line here, I can measure back and then come back up here, measure back, draw that line, and that's going to give me how much will be underneath the floor pan. Hope that makes sense. But then, along with that, that also gives me an idea of where this will end up, because some of this will be under and some will be forward, and I could even bring this back a little and shape it into that curve if I wanted to. So I'm going to experiment a little bit before I do any serious cutting, and I may end up taking all this back off anyhow, but I want to show you just an idea of how you can figure out where that goes. I'll draw these lines out and we'll see how it ends up. So this is the line of the firewall that will go underneath. So I've drawn that line here as well on the firewall. Just kind of backtrack that. Then what I did is I took this piece and I set it back in place, and I made it short because the curve. You can't really account for this curve right here very easily. And then I retrimmed this piece so that when they come together, basically they meet at a corner. So I'm going to show this on the firewall so you see what I'm talking about. One more thing I need to do is measure over 2.5 inches approximately. Reason for that, and that's going to indicate the thickness of the inner rocker panel. So if I took this piece and I put it on the edge of that line and the edge of that line, so now I have this as an indicator and that as an indicator. Then I take this piece and bring it down to make contact. That gives me probably a better location when I have to trace this out so that I can cut. Hope that makes sense. Again, this is just my way of doing things. If you want to try it a different way, by all means do that, but I'm just trying to show you some of the techniques that I might use in making this happen. So that would be basically the new cut line. And that is if I'm not going to make a flange like I'd mentioned earlier, so this will just be cut open. I think my calculations were pretty close. So, nice tight space here that I wanted. I need to actually make this gap a little bigger and up here a little bigger to compensate for the torque box. Now, it fits in there so snug. There we go. So I just have to allow for that thickness of that metal there and that metal on the side. And my lines are where I wanted them. So if I come to the other side, you can see I have the torque box just setting up underneath there as well. And this one was a little bit better. Like I'd made enough room for that part of the flange, but this upper piece is still hitting, and there's enough room on this side as well for that side of the flange. So I'm really close, just a little trimming on both of these, and it's going to be right where it needs to be. I have to say I'm pretty happy with how this is fitting. So I have the firewall in place after I trimmed it. I do have the upper plates in for the torque box pieces, and I have a nice consistent gap the way I want it. So that looks really good. Everything appears to be lining up like it should. Now what I will do, I'll show you on this side. I still have a little bit of trimming to do actually, because this right here is a little tight. There's a bit of a hump where the firewall is fighting this inner rocker. So just trim that just a little bit and it'll be fine. I did have to trim some on this edge. This one seemed to be a little wider in this area. I don't know. So I had to trim off just that much of the firewall. And other than that, all these gaps worked out really nice. Now, what I want to do from here is set the frame rails back in place, and the flanges, the mating flanges that go to the firewall, I will trace them out. I want to trace around those so I know exactly where they're at. I can take the rails back out and back drill through the firewall, because when it comes time to weld this together, that's the easiest way to do it, is to weld on this side of the firewall. Really it'd be a lot more difficult to weld it from that back side because that metal is thicker. Along with that, I will trace around the plates so I know exactly where those are at and where I want to put welds, again from the inside through the firewall into those plates, because you can't really access it anyway from this side once you start putting things together. So those need to be identified, trace those out, get me the pattern that I want to use, and also, as I mentioned earlier about these flanges here on the inner frame rail. So I want those to be welded to the torque box plate as well. So I need to identify specifically where those are on the plates. So I'm liking it. I mean, this is fitting very, very well, and we're gonna I'll put the frame rails up in there, and we'll take another look at it. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. This fits very, very well. The only little conflicts that I see are some of the gaps, but that little gap at the top, I think the problem is the corner up here of the apron is catching on the radius or the curve of the firewall, and I think it's going to help tighten it up a little bit. If that's the only gap that I have, I can modify that. I can massage that flange back a little. The rest of it fits pretty close. Down here, similar situation, slightly off. Might take a little trim right there, and it might help a little bit. Those are really trivial when it comes to this sort of thing. Over on the other side, pretty nice. Now this piece can be dollied back to meet this angle. So when they made this was just stamped straight, but this can be angled back and the rest of it lines up super nice. So I am very happy with how this is looking. The tracings, I did those, I traced around, and it's really hard to tell. I traced around the frame rails, so now I have the witness marks, what I need to drill. Also, I want to show you a couple things. So this jig right now, if I were to put this leveling, laser level thing on here, it would be almost at 0, which is what you want it to be. And this is actually pretty close too. This is, there's obviously variables with metal, so that's not even a quarter, maybe a quarter of a degree, something like that. So that's really nice. And what I've done is some measuring. I'm going to try to show you this. So I have this piece of square tubing. I usually can trust square tubing. It's about as straight as you can get, and that is thick wall tubing as well. So I've just set that across the top of the jig. All right, and if I take the tape measure and I touch off at that point and come up here, we're close to 30 quarter, 5/16, something like that. If I come to the other side, do the same thing, touch off that, and look at that, about a quarter, 30 1/4, 5/16. Now the other measurement that I want to take is I'm going to hook onto the face, the interface of the firewall, and come forward, and this measurement, and I know this is kind of arbitrary because the shapes can change on these, but there's 40 and about 5/8, maybe a hair under. If I come to this side, hook to the firewall, and come in, this one is at 40, maybe 3/8. But again, that's pretty minor overall, because when you do the math, that's not even close, a little about a 1/16 of an inch difference. So everything else is playing out really nice. I'm trying to adjust my tape measure here. If I go to the frame jig and I come up to the firewall, so there's 30 3/4. I'd go with that to that corner. We'll go to the other side. Drop inside of the vice grip, come down, and essentially 30 and maybe 7/8, maybe. But I still think this is going to change a little whenever I cut that corner up there. It may allow this to flex down just a little, but regardless, that's super close. I've taken apart original cars that weren't even near that measurement or near that those dimensions, so I'm pretty happy with it. Now what I want to do is I'll set the sides up on here, and I'll probably use a complete assembly with the dynacorn rocker panels just because they're already attached, and just see how things line up. Of course, I will be using the original rocker panels from the 68 coupe, but yeah, I'm I'm pretty excited about how this is going. So I wanted to find out. I trimmed that corner off, and if I take the tape and put it up here, essentially we're at 30 and just a tick over 3/4. Yep, I'm happy with that. So I want to show you a couple things while I'm test fitting panels and seeing what fits and what doesn't fit. If you remember when I did the Cobra Jet, I had a problem with the side panels because the panel itself would not come forward far enough to interact with the firewall. And I'm going to show you why that is. However, I have set up this side of the car and I've clamped it in place so that it's just held on by those vice grips. I've already test fitted the wheelhouse pieces and all that worked out fine. Now I'll point out that I'm currently have the rocker panel that came with this from Dynacorn, and I'm not going to be using that. Now, what I ran into is right here, this had an extra piece of metal sticking out. And when I was bringing this forward, that piece of metal was hitting the inner rocker. So once I took some measurements, I was able to cut that little corner out and then slide this forward. However, you'll notice this right here, this front edge of the outer rocker. It's already making contact with this. Now, the reason for that is Dynacorn has made their own version, let's say. So here is the original rocker that I'm going to be using, and this is mated against the driver's side panel. So there's notches cut right here in this. There's a notch there. And there's a notch here. Now, the original panels are two pieces, so you have this forward section and this rear section that overlap. What you'll notice is this right here. Hopefully I'm aimed in the right spot. So this extra flange was added by Dynacorn because the original cars, this was short and it was welded on this edge, and Dynacorn makes them so you can put plug welds in. And that's cool, that's fine. I'm just pointing this out because what you run into is when you're coming forward, this can hit that inner rocker panel. This is the notch that I was talking about that was hitting the inner rocker panel. Now, I don't know why they do that. I don't know what's going on with that, but I just cut that little corner off and I was able to bring that forward. So the other things, this is a decent design here. This matches this curve inside of here. And when I was measuring, I was just curious. I'm like, well, why, what are they doing? And it's the fact that, if I can get this tape to go the right way, this is about 74 1/4, and the Dynacorn piece is like 75. So you end up with extra material there. Now, what I wanted to do was verify where this is all sitting, right? Because I know my jig. I know I've got this all built right. I know I have all this setting in the right spot. The firewall fits nice. Everything is lined up nice. But whenever it comes time to index fore and aft, you run into a bit of a conflict. Because here, as I pointed out, this is what the original rocker would look like, this short distance right here. It's shorter than this flange. Now, in this case, the only notch, I don't even know if there is a notch. Yeah, there's no notches on the bottom of the inner rocker on this design. So you can't really go by that. And what I wanted to do was verify this length, let's say. So I was taking some measurements from this flange back to points where the B-pillar attaches. I did some comparisons between this side and that side. And then I thought, well, there's something that I can use as a direct reference for the most part. And I'm just using this at this point. So here, this B-pillar, or A-pillar, I'm sorry, has this flange. And we're going to assume that it's in the right spot. No reason not to. You know, when they build these things, and I've shown it with the other panels when I put in the Dynacorn cowl, things lined up really nice. But I'm going to assume that's in the right spot. So if I take a measurement from the front edge of that, as best I can, it's kind of hard to do all this and hold my head right. We're at 54 1/4. We're at 54 1/4 to this front corner of the apron. So let's take a look at an original car. Now, you may have seen this before. This is my 68 that I called Poco. This car is straight. It's not been wrecked, so the frame rails are in the right spot. Everything is in good shape underneath. And I've used this car to help me build the actual frame jig that I have. So, if I come off of this corner, and I cleaned off the sealant that was there, seam sealer, but if I come off of this corner, and I gotta go over top of the splash guard, I know, but this is right at 54 1/4. 54 1/4. So that lets me feel confident about the distance that I have this way in alignment with like the core support and everything else. So when you do this, try to get some measurements that you can use as a reference point later when you're putting things back on. Now, of course, when I do this stuff, I am not welding anything together. I'm not putting this car together yet. I am just test fitting everything, and I will actually put on doors and fenders and everything else to make sure it all lines up before I ever strike an arc. Alright, now that I have done all of the test fitting up front here with the torque boxes, the firewall, frame rails, all that sort of thing, I kind of did a mock-up. I wanted to show you what it looks like loosely fitting everything together. Nothing is in its final location, everything is just clamped up just to see where the metal is and adjustments that I'll need to make later. So as I mentioned, I had to modify the firewall slightly for the torque boxes to fit, and I traced out the frame rails so I knew where to drill holes. All that'll have to happen. I'll be drilling up all this stuff. Same thing there, making contact points for the torque boxes. And I will be swapping out the rocker panels for the factory ones. We all know that. I don't have the cowl. I did order one. It's probably going to be here in the next couple days, but I wanted to have it in, but I could not put it in at this time. So with this on everything clamped in, you know, I've got, like I said, really nice non-gap here on this side. And I also mentioned about modifying the kick panel and cutting that notch out. That allowed this to come forward and allowed it to overlap the firewall like it should. So come around to the other side, same situation, notched out that kick panel, overlaps nice here, lines up good. Firewall really close. I don't have it fully adjusted. It needs to come forward just a little bit to make contact with the frame rail. This is just a general mock-up look at it. Now up here, the roof lines up really nice on that inner structure piece, that header panel, and there's still some tweaking to go because there you guys see a little bit of a gap here, there's a little bit on that side, and all of this will change as I move forward. I will do cross measuring as I make adjustments to make sure that these pieces are parallel or square to each other. And then coming back here to the quarter panels, decent overlap here. There's still some adjustment that's going to happen. This is just loosely clamped into place. I still have to fit it up a little more snug on the wheelhouse there and also here. And these wheelhouses, I didn't do any measuring or anything when I put these in, and what ended up showing that, I want to detail this. So up here at the top there's a gap right now for this inner brace. that's going to go away almost instantly when I adjust that wheelhouse, because you can see the overlap here, the way they roll that in. This back section needs to come down a little bit, and that front section comes up, and that'll take care of this gap. I also have both of the wheelhouses inside of that inner structure piece on both sides. Same situation here with that little bit of a gap. Adjust the wheelhouse and it'll take care of it. On the deck filler panel, this piece, this little tab here, goes inside of this channel. I looked at it a couple different ways. I'm like, well, could it go underneath? And I don't think they would have done that. Pretty confident this would have been on the outside. Makes more sense when you think about it from a weather perspective too. So rain would come out and run down, rainwater. You don't want it to trap underneath. So this will get adjusted as well. Right now it's a little wide, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's same thing over here. It doesn't sit down in this channel. I'll have to adjust this to make that work. The tail panel is just clamped up. There's nothing in place. When this is fully installed, this flange will be on the outside of this flange, and that'll interact more with the quarter panel as well when it all gets to that point. This side, same thing. This little bit of space there, and this will squeeze right down. And this is the gap that I was talking about over here as well. This will all move. You know, you can really massage these in a lot of different directions. Now, I will point out too, when I do this, when I get to the point where I'm going to be welding, I will test fit the doors first. I'll make sure they line up. I'll test fit the fenders, make sure they line up, make sure all the body lines are within each other, you know, where they're supposed to be. Make sure my gaps are right on the bottom. All that sort of stuff I will do before I do any welding at all, because once you weld stuff together, and I've had a lot of people contact me through email and Facebook and stuff, and they comment about how, hey, this is off, what can I do? Hey, this is off, what can I do? And I always stress this: test fit, test fit, test fit. Make sure you are completely satisfied before you just start welding on these things. Now that'll be the end of this video. There's a lot more to do. The next segment, I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to cover on that. They may be working more on the rocker panels, taking the dynacorn ones off of the side pieces and fitting up the original ones to the car, and then working on getting all that together. This is coming together fairly quickly. This is less involved, let's say, than a Cobra Jet was, because of all the pieces and parts that I had to save from the Cobra Jet. This one is more of a one-off type of thing, and I think it's going to turn out pretty cool. Now there will be suspension upgrades, engine upgrades, all those sort of things that will come down the road, but for now I just want to keep on taking care of the body and getting it together. So once again, thank you. I want to thank my patrons who continue to support me. Thankfully for them, they keep me going. YouTube doesn't really care what I do. I know a lot of you do. I know a lot of you like to see what I do, but YouTube in general doesn't care what I do. So my patrons help me keep this going. So once again, thank you to them. If you're interested in becoming a patron, there's a link in the description below. There will also be links for various other tools and products that I've used on this channel, and take a look at that. If you're interested, there's also an Amazon link and stuff like that. So that'll be it. Until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.